Hey, hello, this is Jonathan van der Waard from the Netherlands. And in this tutorial, I want to show you how to collect data from the Spotify API through Power BI. I will show you step by step how to set it up and how to collect data on artists, albums, tracks, and even track features. I'll use an example that I worked through myself recently on film composers. I selected a list of film composers that I love to listen to and I want to see the data for. This is what that list will look like. It's basically a one-column table with names of people who created music for the best movies in the world. Alright, so what will this video be about? Just to set some context and give you an idea of what will happen in the coming hour. We'll look at the Spotify API and I will help you to understand the basics of that Spotify API. Then we'll go to Power Query and collect data from that Spotify API. First in a standard table, and then I will show you how to create a function on top of it so that we can build the right cascade. What we want to do as scope is actually collect data for artists first. So things like what are the number of followers for an artist. Then we want to collect the albums for the artists. After that, we will look into the tracks that are on the albums and what are the top tracks for an artist. And in the very last minutes, I will show you how to collect track features as well. We will spend quite some time in the advanced editor of Power Query, looking at M code. But don't be scared. I will explain in detail what is happening there and how to set it up on your side as well. In the end, it's all about understanding the principles and how to get data for your favorite artists out of the Spotify API. And also to be clear, what is not in scope, we won't do any data modeling or report building in this tutorial. This is all about collecting the data. In my view, that is the tricky part and the first step that you need to take. If this video is successful and I get encouraged to do more, I might dive into those topics as well and show you how to model the data and create a report on top of it. But let's take it step by step and look at data collection first. Here we go. Alright, the very first step is actually to go to this website that I show here on the screen. developer.spotify.com/console. Let's go there. And the page that opens up, if we click this URL, is the console for the Spotify API. And this is the area where you can explore the endpoints and get a feel of how this API works. And in my opinion, that's great. I'm not sure about you, but I don't really like going through lots of documentation and finding out how it works. I love to see some examples, and this is the place to be. And where we will start, there is some information about albums, artists, and all sorts of stuff. But where we need to start is with the search one. Because all these APIs, they need an ID as an input parameter. And we don't have any input parameters at the moment. We only have our little list of composers for which we want to have some information. So let's click on search and click on the endpoint, the only endpoint that is there. And this endpoint is basically there to tell the Spotify API I'm searching for something, right? I can search for an album. Maybe I want to have information about the track. In this case, I want some information about an artist. So that's what we need to provide in the first parameter. And then we need to also tell Spotify what kind of information is this, because you can imagine that some strings will exist as a album name, but also as a track name. And the same might be the case for artists. So this is where we need to be as specific as possible to tell the API what it is that we're looking for. All right, so let's check this out and let's see if we can find any information about Hans Zimmer. Okay, so let's type in the name, Hans Zimmer, and let's provide the Spotify API with some information about the type of record that we're looking for. We're not looking for an album called Hans Zimmer, we're looking for an artist called Hans Zimmer. You can imagine that the Hans Zimmer name is not only related to one individual. There are more people in the world that are called Hans Zimmer. And actually, even in the Spotify world, this is the case. So, yeah, how do we get this one Hans Zimmer that we're looking for? Well, that can be a little bit difficult, especially if you're looking for artists that don't have this wide range of followers. I'm not entirely sure, but I believe that Spotify actually goes through all the artists it can find based on these parameters, and then starts with the one that has most followers, and then does that in provides a list in a descending way. So because I know this, I know we can limit this to one, because we only want one Hans Zimmer record to come back, and we are fine with this thing working in the background, helping us out to identify the one that has most followers. So this is working quite well for us. Anyways, for now we work with limit 1, and now we need to get the token. Right, there is a token here, but let me just show you. You click on this button, and all you need to do is request a token if you're already logged in on Spotify, which you can do via spotify.com. So let's request a token. What happens is that there is a sort of refreshed string coming in this field, and now we can try it out. So on the right side, we can see what happens. What happens is we work with this API that's transformed in this string, and this string is something that we need. So let's copy this and paste this information because we need that in a minute. Right? All right, so the output that Spotify API provides us with is the following. We get some information in the JSON format. Let's just check. Yes, there's German soundtrack. And if we scroll down, we see, yes, the name Hans Zimmer, artist, popularity index 80. I think that's right. And just to highlight, the thing that we're really after is this ID. This ID will enable us to provide as an input parameter to get albums, to get tracks later on, etc., etc. All right, so please make sure that you copy this code, and then let's head over to Power BI and see what we can do with the code that we just copied. See you there. I have Power BI open, I have my notebook open. Let's see what we can do. And let's start with the notebook. So what is that string that we copied just in the previous video? Well, we copied the API and we copied a couple of headers. And there's one header that needs a little bit attention, and that's the authorization header. This is valid for about 1 hour. So we need to make sure this is a parameter in a minute, because it changes over time. If we want to do some requests in the future, we might need a new token. So let's do the right preparations and work with this string from bearer until the end to create a parameter first. Okay, in order to do this, let's get over to the Power Query editor, create a new parameter with this button here. Let's call it authorization bearer. And And this is where we put in that string that we have. Here we go. Okay, first step done. Now what we need to do is to create a new blank query. I have a bit of a code here that we can use just to save some time. So let's open up the advanced editor and right here paste my code. It's not that complicated, but I just wanted to save some time and not type this over and make all sorts of mistakes and stuff. Here we go. A JSON document is what we expect, right? We saw that on the Spotify console that is coming back. We want to fetch that from a URL. So let's put the web contents around that. This is what we're asking the Spotify API. We want to have information about Hans Zimmer. It's an artist, and we want to limit the records to 1. And here are the headers that we need to provide. Might as well do it like this. So there are 3 headers. The first one is the authorization. It doesn't actually matter in which order. I put the authorization in the first one. I want to look at that parameter, right, and pick up the value that the parameter holds. And then these are just fixed values, application/JSON. All right, let's go and click done. Here we are, and we see that we have 1 record. Let's look into it and translate it to a table. Look in the record that's in that table. Turns out there is a list in there. Let's dive in and even click on this record and translate that in a table again. What I will do first is basically transform this in a way that I prefer, and I do that by selecting both the columns and then transpose the information, and as a next step use the first row as headers. This is the format that I'm looking for. We can expand this record if we want to see that a URL where we can directly open Spotify and look at the artist. Not sure I need that at the moment. I'm also not so much interested in the URL again, but I am interested in the total number of followers. I do want to see the genres that he's making his music for. That does generate 3 records instead of 1, because there are 3 genres in this case. But let's not worry about that now. We can always make that, you put that in a separate table later on, and work with unique records again. I just want to expand all the information that is available, get all the information about the images. So there are several images that Spotify has on Hans Zimmer. Let's get it all, and later on work out what we need and what we don't need. Let's give this query a good name, and I will call this get Spotify artist ID for artist name. Right? I provide a name, and for that I want to get the artist ID. So that's step number 1. Why don't we actually give it a 1? Great. All right. Now we go to the next step and see how we can make this work for more than just one specific artist. See you in the next video. Welcome back. This is the next step where we want to see how to do what we just did in the previous video for our complete list of composers. Right, we have this list. It's actually 19 composers that I selected. I like the music they make. I think they're significant when it comes to followers. So let's see what we can do for this group. You can actually load this file. What I will do is just create a table that holds these values, so I don't have any dependency on an external file. So let's use the enter data and paste in what we have. Right, Power BI automatically recognizes that the first row is a header. Great, that's exactly what I need. And let's call this input data. Excellent. All right, it recognizes this as a text. So fantastic. This is what I need. The next step would actually be to get this query going, not only for Hans Zimmer, which we sort of hard-coded in the query, as you can see, right? But get this working for all the composers that we have in our list. How to do this? Well, in order to do this, we need to create a function. So let's duplicate this one, just so we get this test record going, and give it the proper name, function1, and go into the advanced editor. And a function basically needs a parameter. So before we start with the let statement, we need to type in what that parameter needs to be. And what I want is artist name as text to be the input parameter. We just put this behind it, and that's all we need in order to tell Power Query that we want to start our query with a parameter input. And now we obviously need to use that in our query itself. Well, we know that this is actually the part that we want to replace, right? So what we need to do is basically end our string here, then put in our parameter, artist name, then ampersand, and do the rest of the string. So what happens now is basically that the artist name is expected as input, and then this query will run, and when it comes here, it will pick up the value that is there for the record. Let me just demonstrate what this will look like. But first we need to do one more thing, right? Because let me just let you see why. What we have as input in our advanced editor is not Hans and then a space and then Zimmer. No, we have this percentage sign and then 20. So we need to make sure that we mimic that for any artist that has a space in the name, and actually all of them do. So what I want to do first is one more step here, and what I want to do is basically replace each space with percentage 20. So it will look like this. And with this, we really mimic exactly what was there in our hard-coded string that we had for our first query. So now we should be able to invoke this function and see what happens. So in order to do that, we need to go to the Add Column tab in the ribbon and invoke the custom function, which is the one that we just created with that input parameter. Here we go. Yeah, let's call it custom. That's fine for now. We have just one function in this case, so let's select it. And then yes, artist is exactly what we want to use as that input parameter that we set up for this function. So great, let's click OK. Here we go. All valid records, no errors. Great, let's see what's in there. All the fields that we expect are here, so let's look at all of them. And here we go. Those 9 records that we saw in our first query, they're all there with all the details. That's fantastic. But not only for Hans Zimmer, they're there for John Williams, for Jan Tiersen, and all of the others. So fantastic. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And the great thing is that we now have this ID for all of our artists, this column. And that's what we can work with to look for albums and get IDs for albums and stuff to get tracks and all of that. So thanks for listening and see you in the next video to keep going. Hey there, welcome back, and let's look at the next step. I think it's time to do a little bit of cleaning and make sure we have a proper structure. So let's do that first. What I tend to do is create groups for the queries that I have here on the left side. So let's do that. Move this to a group that we call parameters, because at some point we will need more parameters. And I want to have them in the same place. Keep it nice and organized. Then this query is a hard-coded one for Hans Zimmer. We needed that to create this function, but we don't need the hard-coded one. So I'll delete this. And this one I want to put in, not in the parameters, but in a new group, which I want to call input data. Here we go. And this one I will move to a new group called functions, because we will create more functions, and again I want to have them in one place. The only thing is that this is not really input data anymore, so we need to clean this up a little bit as well. And what I suggest is that we remove these steps. We've seen that it works, so it's easy to recreate. And then what I want to do is basically reference this file, and from here create some data to transform. So what I want to build out from this query is basically the base data, as I want to call it, for the artists. It's not necessarily the data that I want to load into the data model, but it's that data that I want to sort of use as a basis for everything I want to do around the artists. So let's create a new group for that as well. I'll call that transform data. And then at some point we will create a folder called, well, why don't we do that right now? Output data. There's nothing in there yet, but we'll get to that point. And at the moment, let's also fix this, because there's nothing more than the input data. But what we want to do is basically build this, invoke this function on the artist, right? As we did in the previous video. I also want to clean up this function a bit, and you will understand in a few minutes, because this function is actually the almost like the template for following functions, because what we do here is basically similar to what we want to do in future functions, right? And I've cleaned up this code a bit. Let me just briefly go through it and explain what that looks like in a sort of further cleansed version. I'll add some documentation lines, comment lines, just to help out. So yeah, we need this function to take some text input. And we've seen before that the API actually can't deal with spaces, and I put that into the function itself so that we can keep the input data nice and clean, understandable, and that we just deal with that part. Just replace the space with the %20 in our function itself. Yeah, and then I split the URL basically in the base URL, as we've seen on the Spotify console as well, and then the relative path, the place where the variables come in, right? So that's the part where we needed to fill that artist name, the type artist. We could make that a variable here as well. I didn't do that in this case, because I only want to use the search API to search for artists and then get the ID for them. You could create a variable for the limit as well. I didn't do that because I always want to have that name and then the most popular record that is found. Yeah, and then this is similar as before, and then I've basically cleansed the steps to pull the data out, get the list, convert it into a table, and then expand the columns in the table. And I've cleaned that up a bit as well to only get the columns out that I really need. Right, so this is what I want in my function, and let's test that out now with our data. So I'll go here, add column, invoke custom function, similar as in the previous video. And here we go. We get the columns, only the columns now that I'm interested in. And as you see, I haven't expanded all of them. And that's also because I want to use that. Oh, this is not something I like. I don't want this prefix. This is much better. All right. At the genres, I want to cut out anyways and create a separate table. The images, I need some work. So yeah, I'll kept it like this. And let's deal with it straight away, because for the followers, I only want the total. And then let's call this followers. I'll do that in the M code straight away, so I don't need an extra step for it, just to keep it nice and clean. And then the images I want to see as well. And then it will expand all the records again. If I do this, but I just want to pick the URL. And I don't need all the images. One image is fine. You see that there are quite a few different sizes available to me. I tend to pick the 640 size. Most of the images are in 640 anyways, and let's just quickly check whether I still have all my artists. Yes, there are still 19 of them. So if you do this with another set of artists, be a bit careful here on the image side, because in some cases a specific format is not there. But I just want to keep one image. You could separate this out and create a separate table for it. I choose not to do so and just keep one image in my artist file. All right, we're almost there. The only thing that I want to create as well is an index column. And I want to give that a proper name because I will work with some indexes later on as well. So let's make sure it's clear what kind of index this is. This is the artist index, and I like indexes to start from 1. It can be useful in some usage of the index later, and I also like it that row number 1 has index number 1, row number 2 has index number 2 here. But that's just a bit of my personal preference. Alrighty. Let's make sure we have the proper format. So I could select all my columns here and then detect data type. Let's just quickly check whether that went okay. Looks like it did. Great. Alright, so we have our base data in place. Let's create some data that we actually want to bring to our model in the next step. Hey there. Okay, let's continue and create some output data. For this, I want to reference my base data, put that in the output folder, and don't call it base data anymore, but just Spotify artists. I want to remove the genres from here because they don't belong to the artist, in my opinion. And we're good to go. That's all. Let's duplicate this for the genres. Then obviously I don't want to remove that, but I just want to keep those columns only, the artist index and my genre, so I remove the other columns. Now I expand this to new rows, and you see that for my first index, we know this is Hans Zimmer. We get several genres, and that's great. We can link them up via the artist index. So all good here. I only want to change this to text. And we have our output data. This is what we want to bring to the data model at some point. Right? I don't want to go there now because we have lots more to do, but you could do so if you want to. And please remember this authorization bearer that we put in the parameter, it will sort of time out at some point. So maybe you need to go back to the Spotify for Developers console page and request a new token. Copy that text again and put it in the parameter here, right? So you can continue. Okay, let's see if we can take the next step and also pick up some albums. For this, I suggest we go to our console page again, and let's go and see if we, for some artists, can find albums. So if I click on the artist item here in the left, I see I can get artist albums, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. So let's quickly have a look at this one and see what we can do. So this seems to be the endpoint. That's what we need in a minute. Also in the query editor, we need to provide an ID. Well, we have an ID now. That's what we actually picked up in the previous steps for Hans Zimmer, for John Williams, and all the others. And then there are some additional parameters that we can provide. Right? You can imagine that composers will bring out their own work, their own albums, but they will also appear on compilation albums and create singles and stuff like that. So you can further restrict the records that you want to get back on that. I don't want to do that. You can restrict it to only things that are published in a specific market, in a country. and limit it and offset it again, similar to what we've seen on the artist. Great. Let's head over to Power Query again and see if we can get this working. All right, we're back at the query editor. Let's create a new blank query, and I want to do that in the functions group here. So let's go for new query, blank query, go to the advanced editor, and that's where I will paste a bit of code just to save some time. And this is where you basically will find some comments of myself to try and explain to you as a viewer what's happening here. We pick up a base URL. It has a bit of different variables. We need to put the artist ID in there instead of the artist name. We're looking for albums, and we work with an offset and a limit again. More on that later, because we will find out that there are some artists that actually have more than 50 albums, and unfortunately we can't put a greater value than 50 in there. Spotify won't allow us. All right, then again, I did some picking of columns that I want. So I don't want all of them, but these are the ones that I want. I selected here. And then I also already took care of some renaming of those columns. I like the capital letters, and I don't like the underscore too much. Maybe for technical fields, but I want to use those fields at some point in the dashboard, and then it helps if they already have a proper name. All right, let's see and test this out. First, I want to give this a good name as well. I'll give this function to get Spotify album for artist ID. Great. And now we want to create some base album data. Yeah. So let's use our base artist data as a starting point. I'll create a reference from here. And instead of base data artist, we will call this base data album. And the thing that we want to start with really is this artist ID. Just for reference later on, I want to bring in the index, artist index as well. The rest I don't need. Remove other columns. And we're good to go. Let's test out whether our new function actually works. Let's invoke a custom function. Now we select the get Spotify album for artist ID. Yes, the artist ID is the variable that we want to bring to that function. And now we get a problem. And this problem is what I've seen before. I've read some documentation online about it, but it's basically dealing with the security settings. And I haven't really figured out how to do this yet. So maybe someone watching this, knowing all details about this stuff, but it seems to be related to your data source settings, where I set everything to the same setting. Let's see if I can show you this. Edit permissions. This is on public. This one is on public. And I'm not sure why I referenced the table. I saw that would be a solution, but still I get this message. So the only thing you can do to work around this is basically change the security, the privacy settings, and ignore the privacy levels and work around this issue. Let's refresh. Edit credentials. Yeah, and this is what you might run into as well. And this is about what I mentioned before, right? This authorization bearer probably ran out by now. That's what you do what you get when you do a lot of talking. So let's pick up a new authorization bearer and see whether that will help us out. Get a new token. Yes, it will refresh this string here. I'll select it, Control C, copy it, go back, go to my parameter, remove the old value, paste in the new one, and let's see whether we're good to go now. We still need to edit those credentials, but we want to access anonymously. Connect. That can take a second, as you can see. It's waiting for API Spotify, but here we go. I see that it gets started. It refreshes the base data for the artist, and that we used as a reference table for referenced for the album. Right, so it looks like we're good. It will take a second to refresh this as well, but I'm sure that will get up in a few seconds. What we are after is seeing if we can get this album details for the artist. Yes, all the columns are there. Let's see if they actually have the right data. And here we go. We have our base album table now. All right, let's do one more thing and make sure that we have the right formats in place. So detect data type after I selected all the columns. And here we go. Let's move over to the next video to talk about getting all the albums and yeah, get some output data on this as well. See you there. Hey there, welcome back. And let's look at that issue that we noticed last time, that we can only pull the first 50 albums out. And if you look at our base data album, we will actually see that for the first artist index, number 1, for which we know it is Hans Zimmer, we will be able to scroll down and see that the first 50 records indeed are for Hans Zimmer, meaning that there could potentially be more albums, but we had this limit, right, of the first 50 only. Same goes for our artist number 2, which is John Williams, etc. So we don't have everything at the moment. And I like to have everything. So let's see how to approach this. What I've done is basically looked at one example artist. I think I picked on Danny Elfman, which is our number 5 artist. Here, let's look at the artist table. No, it's not number 5. It's Danny Elfman is number 11. Right, and I created a query specifically for this code to look at what do we have, and let's walk through that, and that will help us to find a way to pull in all albums instead of only the first 50. So what I've done is basically I started with the same base URL, right, that we used for in the previous video. Then I've done the request, and what we did before is basically work with this list, right? We pick the items from this list because we're interested in what is the data in there. And if I click outside of the text, I see that there are lots of records, And those are those columns that we pulled in our base data album table. But what you will notice is that this very last record of the request actually contains the total, and this is the total number of albums, right? So when it comes to Danny Elfman, one of the artists that I selected and that I've put here, you see the code. The code actually starts with 5, right? That for this artist, Danny Elfman, Spotify has 289 albums. It's a huge number, and I want to collect all of them. Same for the others. So instead of going ahead and looking at the items, we need to do something with this total, right? So let's, instead of picking up that list that's in the items record, let's pick up the total, right? That total is 289. And now we need to basically calculate the number of offsets, which is quite simple, right? We divide 289 by 50. And we know what that number is. We need to take care of some rounding in the process, but that's not that difficult. So what I do is basically divide the total albums that I had, 289, by 50 minus 1, so that I get the number of offsets that I need to deal with, right? Means that we need 5 records of offset. Let's create a list for that. And because a list will start with 0, right, this is exactly what I need. So this is the first 50, 51 till 100, 100 till 150, 151 till 200, 200 till 250, and then 250 till, well, 300, but there are only 289 records. So this will not give us 50 records back, but, well, all of them that we need for Danny Elfman. Yeah. Now we convert this to a table and multiply this by 50, right? Because I want the first, I want to start from 0, and then I'll take care of that limit 50. Then I start from 50 and look at the next 50 records, etc., etc. So this is what we need to bring into our function, so that it not only considers the artist ID, but also takes a variable for that offset. Let's see how that works in a function. Okay, so let's create a new function. New query, blank query. And this is again where I will save some time and paste in the code. Again, some comments. I won't repeat the ones that we looked at before, but instead of looking at the list, let's pick up the total, divide it by 50 as we just saw. Create a list from starting from 0 with the number of offsets, and then multiply by 50. So what we just saw in that test query that I created, I now put in a function. And this function has the artist ID as an input value. Okay, great. So let's call this function number 3. Get Spotify album offset. Excellent. All right, so now we need to work back a little bit. Let's remove the steps that we had. We know they work, so we can just repeat them. I just want to start at this point, right, where we have the 19 artists of my selection. We have the artist ID. And now I first want to figure out what is the offset number for each artist. How many albums did they create, and what does that mean for the number of offsets? Well, we created a custom function for this. So let's invoke that. Yes, the artist ID is indeed the input variable. Let's expand it. Cool. So now we see that Power BI basically created separate rows for all those offset records that I created in that function, right? So instead of having one row for artist number 1, which we know is Hans Zimmer, there are actually a couple of lines, 12 lines, starting from 0, 50 all the way to 550. So that's quite an impressive number of albums. For John Williams, it's even more, as you can see, right? We know that that's number 2. Let's call this offset. Make sure we make it a text. You might wonder why not create this as a whole number, but as input for the API, we really need it as text, and I don't want to transform it there. So let's make sure this is text here, and we're good to go. Because now what I want to do is basically go back to that album for artist function, go to the advanced editor, and then instead of saying, well, we have this artist ID as variable, I actually want to add a variable, right? Because I want to change this offset every time. So let's add another variable, offset as text is what we just said. Let's make sure this still aligns nicely. Here we go. And then what we need to do is basically the same as we did before. On that variable, we end this text string here, then put an ampersand, another ampersand, and start the rest of the string like this. And then we put this offset right between those ampersand signs. Here we go. Alright, so what this is basically asking us now is not only give me the artist ID when I start this function, but also give me the offset and run through every record. Let's see what this will look like. Click done. Go to our base data album where we only ran the offset function now, but now we both have that artist ID and we have that offset, right? And that means that for every combination we can put in 50 records now, 50 albums, and that's exactly what I want to do. So let's invoke a function, do the album for artist ID, right? That is what we want to do. We might need to change that name for artist ID and offset, but let's not worry about it too much now. I also want to get the offset from a field in my table, which is actually the offset column. So these settings should help us to run the function. Let's see what happens. Obviously, this is a little bit more work for Spotify because we basically multiply the requests. So we need to be a little bit more patient than before and wait for the API to pull in all the data that we are requesting. But there we are. There's the column. Let's expand it and see what we got back. Great. All right. So we got all the albums. You can see them here with the album names, or even some exotic names in there. And let's just quickly test. Yeah, we're already beyond the 50 and it's still artist number 1. Right, and I think when we scroll down, it's still artist number 1. So we get a lot more albums in for Hans Zimmer now. That's amazing, isn't it? All right. Well, I won't go through all the detail from here, but you can apply this principle on the tracks as well, right? So there will be albums where we have more than 50 tracks on an album, especially on those compilation albums. That's the case. I will quickly show you the code that I created in the next video, but yeah, go through a little bit less detail than I'm doing now, just to save some time, and also trusting that if you got this far, you will sort of understand what to do. If not, please throw me a question, and I'm happy to see if I can help out. For now, let's clean this one up. That was only there to explain what we're gonna do in this video, and set the stage for the offset function. And like I said a minute ago, I think we should add offset here as well, because there are 2 parameters now instead of 1. Okay, let's go to the next video. See you there. Hey there, welcome back. And this will be the last part of this little series about Spotify API and Power BI. Let's do a quick review and look at the last details. So what have we done so far? We basically looked at the Spotify API, picked up the token that we need and the endpoint strings. On the endpoint strings, we've created functions. First to basically collect the artist ID for the artist name. Then for the artist ID, we wanted to pick up the albums. And for the albums, we want to pick up the tracks. So that's what I've added since. I also added a function to get the top tracks for an artist. Top tracks are only relevant within the context of a country. So I created a new parameter. I live in the Netherlands, so I've collected those within the context of the Netherlands. Calling each of these functions was triggered from the input data first, where we had the names of an artist. From there, we collected the artist ID. With the artist ID, we collected an album. And with the album, you can collect tracks. And then with tracks, you can collect features. So that's the way things build up. And that's what you see here as a result. Each time I have base data, which I then further expand with what I get from the function. And each next step is really starting with the code that I got from the previous base data set, and then call a function, expand the data from there, etc., etc. In the end, these are the tables that we really want to bring to the data model. So you will find that all of these transform data tables are disabled when it comes to loading. I don't need those in my model. I only need them to get to the output data point. So that's the overall approach in review, and also including last steps like tracks and features. When it comes to the features, there is a remark to make, and I've said this before, but this authorization token is only valid for about an hour. And if you collect data for a significant group of artists like I did, right? These are 19 artists, and they've all been very active. Created lots of albums with lots of tracks on each album. And if you just look at the total number of tracks, then there will be a lot of them. I think I have about 300,000 tracks in total. And the thing to realize is that some of these composers, they work together. So a track that someone worked on could be a track that someone else in this list worked on as well. And another thing is that both Hans Zimmer as well as John Williams or any other composer for that matter can be both there on a compilation album, right? So there will be duplicates in the tracks. So before you go to the features, I would recommend to deduplicate the list of tracks, so you don't do too much calls to Spotify. And then even if you deduplicate the list will probably be too long for you to call the Spotify API and get all the features within 1 hour. So I did a sort of additional step for this because I do want to have the track features. Maybe you say, well, I don't. And then that's fine. I think you can basically pick up everything that I have here, those 4 main elements, within an hour. But the issue is there with the track features as well. So what I did is basically export the tracks to an Excel file, created another Power BI file, which I have here, which basically starts with the unique track IDs only, right? That I put in an Excel file based on my previous Power BI file. And then from there I call this track features function. I don't really need those functions, but you see how I sort of used the previous file as a basis and stripped down everything I didn't need. And then what I apply here is basically filtering the rows on a set of 20,000 rows, and that works fine with my internet connection and details. It could depend on the internet connection how much you can actually pull in within an hour, but 20,000 works, and it looks like if I want to download too much more, it won't be successful within the hour. And then if I have come that far, right, and have invoked the function, expanded to all the details, then I basically go close and apply, go to the date table section and copy all those 20,000 records to Excel, and in Excel basically build up the file with all the features, so I can load that in later, and I'm not dependent really on the Spotify API, because each time I make a change in my query editor, then the process will run again. I need that token again, and need to wait some time, and I'm not that patient, and also it doesn't work for the track features. So that's the way I approached it. I hope this is helpful, and I wish you all the best to mimic this process, collect the data for yourself, and create some awesome reports on top of it. Maybe as a last step, I will very quickly go through the advanced editor code, just to show you that there's nothing fancy or different than what I've done before. So for the top tracks, there's a little bit of a different endpoint, but the principle is the same as what I've shown before. I also need to pick up an offset for the tracks. I created a separate function for this, similar as the offset for the albums, but then within the context of tracks. Based on that, I have created a function that collects the tracks. Again, same approach, nothing special here. And last but not least, the features, right? Where we can understand all sorts of details about a single track, how danceable it is, in what key it was played, and stuff like that. So yeah, that's it basically when it comes to collecting the data. I will leave it with this for now. Maybe I'll take a next step. No guarantee here, but maybe I'll take a next step and also create a tutorial on how to model and create a report on top of it. But this is, this can be quite a tricky step, and hopefully you are more familiar with creating a model and a report yourself and can play around with it, just with a little bit of help on collecting the data. So that was the purpose of this video. I hope you like it. I hope you find it useful, and I'm looking forward to all your reports. Feel free to tag me on LinkedIn or send me a message when you have created something. I'm very happy to have a look and see what you've done with it. Goodbye for now. Cheers.
Time to go.
Cast off those lines! Good doggy. Alas, my children, this is the day you shall always remember as the day that you almost... Captain Jack Sparrow.